You have made it to the final video in this series. Which means something. Not because finishing a series is impressive, but because the fact that you are still here suggests something about you. You are looking for something that lasts. Not the burst of motivation that carries you for 2 weeks and then disappears. Not the dramatic reinvention that works until life gets complicated. Not the intense commitment that burns bright and then burns out. Something that lasts. That is what this final video is about. Not how to be more disciplined. How to stay disciplined. For a long time. In a way that does not cost you everything. Because throughout this series, we have covered a lot of ground. We redefine discipline as freedom rather than punishment. We talked about why motivation fades and what to do instead. We explored how habits form in the brain. We looked at sleep, money, and health as specific forms of discipline. And in the last video, we talked about what happens when discipline turns toxic. Now we pull all of it together. What does a life of sustainable discipline actually look like? The first thing to understand is that sustainable discipline is not about maintaining maximum intensity forever. That is not discipline. That is simply exhausting yourself on a longer timeline. Think about how nature works. There are seasons. There is growth and there is dormancy. There is the tide coming in and going out. There is summer's fullness and winter's stillness. Human beings are not separate from that pattern. We have our own seasons. Our own cycles of energy and recovery, focus and rest, expansion and consolidation. Sustainable discipline works with those cycles, not against them. It does not demand that you produce at your highest level every single day of the year. It demands that you stay connected to your practice, even when the practice looks quieter, smaller, and less impressive than at other times. Sustainable discipline looks more like seasons than sprints. It has periods of intense focus and periods of deliberate recovery. It has peaks of output and valleys of restoration. It recognizes that the human system, your body, your brain, your attention, is not designed to operate at full capacity every single day of the year. Alex Sejong Kim Pang is a researcher and writer who spent years studying the daily routines of highly creative and productive people. Scientists, artists, writers, musicians. People who produced extraordinary work over long careers. What he found was surprising. The most productive among them did not work the longest hours. They worked intensely for relatively short periods, often around 4 hours of genuinely focused work per day, and then they rested. Deliberately. Consistently. And that rest was not an accident or a weakness. It was part of the practice. He noted something telling about the research on elite performance. The famous idea that expertise requires 10,000 hours of deliberate practice is widely known. Less widely known is what the same research found about rest. World-class performers also accumulated roughly 12,500 hours of deliberate rest, sleep, recovery, play, walks, time entirely away from their craft. The rest was not the opposite of the work. It was the other side of the same coin. This matters enormously for anyone trying to build sustainable discipline. Because the culture most people live in sends a very different message. The culture says, rest is for when the work is done. And since the work is never done, rest is always getting pushed back. You earn rest by doing enough. But enough never arrives. So rest never quite happens. And slowly, quietly, the person who operates this way depletes. Not all at once. In small increments. Until one day the system simply refuses to continue at the pace being asked of it. Sustainable discipline rejects this entirely. Rest is not what happens when the work is done. Rest is part of the work. Recovery is not a reward. It is a requirement. The second thing that makes discipline sustainable over the long term is building it around identity rather than goals. We touched on this in earlier videos, but it bears returning to here. Goals have a finish line. And finish lines create a specific problem. When you reach a goal, the structure that was holding your behavior together can collapse. People lose weight for a wedding and gain it back after. Runners train for a marathon and stop exercising when it is over. People save hard for a purchase and then spend just as freely once they have it. Goals motivate us to arrive at a destination. But they do not teach us who to be once we are there. Identity works differently. When discipline becomes part of who you are, not what you are doing, but who you are, it does not end when a milestone is reached. The person who sees themselves as someone who takes care of their health does not stop exercising after losing 10 kilos. The person who sees themselves as someone who manages money intentionally does not abandon that practice once they have paid off a debt. The behavior continues because it is now an expression of identity. Not an effort toward a goal. Research in behavior change supports this consistently. Long-term maintenance of new behaviors is much more likely when the behavior aligns with how a person sees themselves. When the new behavior becomes part of the internal story someone tells about who they are. There is a concept in psychology called self-perception theory. It suggests that we often understand our own values and attitudes by observing our own behavior. When you consistently act in a certain way, you begin to conclude, I must be the kind of person who does this. The behavior precedes and solidifies the identity. And once the identity is solid, the behavior becomes self-reinforcing. It no longer requires constant motivation or willpower. It just requires being who you are. This is the long game of discipline. You are not just building habits. You are building a self. A more grounded, more capable, more consistent version of the person you started as. The implication is important. As you build discipline, you should not just be thinking, what am I trying to achieve? You should also be asking, who am I becoming? Because the answer to that second question is what makes the first question sustainable. The third element of sustainable discipline is flexibility. Rigid systems break. Flexible systems bend and recover. The person who has a perfect plan and no tolerance for deviation will abandon the plan the moment life makes it impractical. One missed day becomes 2. One broken week becomes a lost month. The person who has a flexible system and a strong identity will adapt. They will do the smaller version when the bigger version is not possible. They will miss a day and return the next. They will adjust without abandoning. Flexibility is not the same as inconsistency. You can be deeply consistent in your commitment to something while being flexible in how you express that commitment on any given day. The non-negotiable is the identity. The expression of that identity can vary. Some days the workout is an hour. Some days it is 10 minutes. Some days the discipline of writing is a full chapter. Some days it is one paragraph. What never changes is the showing up. The relationship with the practice. The refusal to let a hard day become a reason to quit entirely. The fourth element is what might be called deep play. Alex Sejong Kim Pang observed that the most sustainably productive people in his research did not just rest passively. They had activities outside their main work that fully engaged them. Things they were genuinely absorbed by. That restored them not through disengagement but through a different kind of engagement. For Darwin it was long walks and his greenhouse experiments. For many scientists, it was music. For others, sports, cooking, gardening, craftsmanship. These were not distractions. They were essential. They provided a complete break from the cognitive demands of the primary work while keeping the person energized and alive in a different way. When your life has only work and recovery from work, it becomes narrow. Unsatisfying. Hard to sustain. When your life also has play, genuine play, absorbing play, play that has nothing to do with productivity, the discipline you bring to your work becomes more durable. Because you are a whole person, not just a working machine. The fifth element is perhaps the most important. Knowing your own rhythm. Every person has patterns. Times of day when focus comes easily. Times when rest is genuinely needed. Seasons of high energy and seasons of lower output. Cycles of expansion and consolidation that are unique to who you are. Sustainable discipline is not about following a system designed for someone else. It is about understanding your own system well enough to work with it rather than against it. Some people do their best work early in the morning. Others think more clearly later in the day. Some people need long stretches of uninterrupted time. Others work better in shorter focused intervals. Some handle high-intensity effort better in shorter bursts. Others maintain moderate effort more reliably over longer periods. None of these differences are flaws. They are simply how different people are wired. And the most sustainable version of discipline for you is the one that accounts for how you actually work. Not the one that looks impressive in theory. Getting to know your own rhythms is itself a discipline. A quiet, patient practice of observation. Of noticing what conditions allow you to do your best work. What depletes you? What restores you? What structures help you and which ones work against you? It takes time. But it is worth the attention. Now, here is how we bring this full circle. We started this series by saying that discipline is not punishment. It is not restriction. It is not suffering. Discipline is the practice of keeping the promises you make to yourself. Sustainable discipline adds one more layer. It is the practice of making promises that you can actually keep. That fit your life. That are flexible enough to survive real circumstances. That are rooted in who you are, not just what you want. That include rest as part of the structure rather than as an afterthought. The goal was never to become a machine. The goal was always to become more fully yourself. More capable. More grounded. More free to pursue what actually matters to you. That does not happen in a dramatic week of intense commitment. It happens across months and years of quiet, consistent, imperfect effort. The kind of effort that includes bad days and recovers. That includes missing the mark and returning anyway. That bends without breaking. That rests without guilt. That shows up without requiring ideal conditions. That is the discipline worth building. Not the kind that makes you impressive to others. The kind that makes your life genuinely your own. And this is where the series ends. Not with a dramatic conclusion. With a beginning. Because everything covered here only becomes real in the practice. In the daily, unglamorous, chosen moments of showing up. Not perfectly. Sustainably. One day at a time. I hope this video brought you something meaningful. If you find it helpful, please like and share it with someone who may need it. Subscribe if you would like to hear more stories like this. Wishing you a calm and peaceful day.